नमस्कार। आपकी दीदी जी है नहीं क्या?
So, Abid, can we start?
Yes, sir.
Please take out this sharing. Abid, take out.
बीच में जो रखे हैं वो
इसके ऊपर कैमरा है।
Abid, just unshare this screen. This screen which is visible.
आप तो इसको शेयर करो।
So that is just
Yes.
yeah. Change the view for the speaker.
Welcome back to this important lecture series, 75 lecture series. As you know, it's being organized for a very important cause and very relevant cause, because we are all going to celebrate the 75 glorious years of India's independence. Friends, ICAR has taken many activities to celebrate the 75 years of independence, and one of the activity which is very popular now is the 75 lecture series up to 15th August 2022. And I am happy to inform all of you that we have already completed 50 lectures, and today is the 51st lecture. And these lectures are so popular now that wherever we go and wherever there is a meeting, even in the governing body meeting, one vice chancellor was saying it's a very useful lecture series for the students and for the faculty. So keeping in view the past importance of these lectures and other things, in the same series we have a very important lecture today also, and the topic is the quest for a zero hunger, India lessons from the Green Revolution. And that is a very prominent speaker, a very prominent researcher, Professor Prabhu Pingali. I will just briefly introduce about the speaker. Professor Prabhu Pingali is the founding director of TCI, and presently he is the chair of the CRISET governing board and a professor in the Charles Dyson School of Applied Economics and Management, with joint appointments in the Division of Nutritional Sciences and the Department of Global Development in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at Cornell University. Prior to moving to Ithaca in June 2013, Professor Pingali was the Deputy Director of the Agriculture Development Division of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation from 2008 to May 2013. Professor Pingali was elected to the US National Academy of Science as a foreign fellow in May 2007. He was the president of the International Association of Agriculture Economists from 2003 to 2006. He was also elected fellow of the American Agriculture Economics Association in 2006 and of the International Association of Agriculture Economists in 2009. We are all eagerly waiting for the lecture of Professor Pingali, and I will not extend much, but I will just also thank Professor Mahapatra, Secretary DARE and DG ICR. He is chairing. And this is the first meeting today, I can just tell you, in the hybrid mode. The Deputy Director Generals, the directors of the institutes, deliberate institutes, they are physically present in this CAP 2, Krasi Anusandhan Bhavan, building 2. And we are just trying that, let us see how best we can conduct this in the hybrid mode. And maybe subsequently we can shift from the hybrid mode to the totally physical mode. So let us just see how we proceed. And again, I want to thank all the participants, especially Deputy Director Generals, the representatives from the ICAR-IASRI, Dr. Padi is here, and other colleagues are here, and our colleagues, senior colleagues from the headquarters, they are all present here. So I hand over the proceedings to Professor Pingali to further take it. Thank you, sir. Thank you for accepting our invitation, and thank you for coming all the way from US to deliver this lecture. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Can I go to switch? Good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Agarwal, Dr. Mahapatra. Ladies and gentlemen, it's such a great pleasure for me to be here in Delhi today in ICAR and to participate in the 75th anniversary lecture series, the 75th anniversary of India's independence. It's a great honor to actually be one of the first to do this in a hybrid mode. Initially, I was going to do this on Zoom, but since I was planning to be in India, I thought it would be good to do it in person. Imagine we're celebrating 75 years of Indian independence. Looks like. Okay, that's taken care of. We're celebrating 75 years of India's independence, and we've seen enormous progress. When India became independent, India was a very poor country with very high levels of food insecurity, high levels of famine. Hunger was prevalent. And today, we are talking about India being an emerging economy, becoming a major global power, a country that's moving rapidly into middle-income status, a country with rapid urbanization, rapid growth in incomes. So we have a lot to celebrate. But even as we go through that process, and even as we recognize the major achievements, we should recognize that we're also a country with the largest number of hungry people. We're also the country with the largest number of malnourished children and underweight women. And we, as a country, we've been recognizing this problem. As a country, we've been recognizing this dichotomy between growth that's happening and the rise in middle-class incomes, but at the same time seeing this problem of chronic malnutrition, chronic hunger, and chronic rural poverty. And that's being recognized, and it's recognized through government policy. And one of the ways that that recognition has come is through investments in agriculture and asking for doubling agriculture product. And thinking about using agriculture as an engine of growth as it was done in the past. So that's an important policy imperative that the government is pursuing. So as we look at agriculture, revitalizing the role of agriculture as an engine of growth, we need to then ask the question, what are some of the lessons we've learned from the past? What are the lessons that we've learned from the Green Revolution? The lessons which were positive and the lessons which were not so positive. And how do we use these lessons as we continue to promote agriculture as an engine of growth and as a way of enhancing food security? So that's what I'd like to talk about. And so let me start with one slide that I think summarizes the best for all of us on what we have achieved in terms of agriculture in this country. This slide shows you what's happening to rice imports and exports since 1960. Look, can you imagine, just a little over 60 years ago, you had a country that was importing massive amounts of food grain, rice, meat, etc. And our dependence on food imports was tremendous. But look what happened. Since about 1990, India has become a major food exporter. India has become a major rice exporting country. We haven't been importing rice since about 1990. We still have some wheat imports, but it's at a margin. So if I can think about one way to summarize the impact of our investments in agriculture, it's to look at the way in which we've transformed ourselves from being food deficit to becoming a food exporting country. I think what agricultural development has done is that it has made famine history. We no longer think about India as being at a risk of famines. Yes, we have hunger, but the idea of widespread deficiency in food availability is no longer something that we would worry about. Another slide that tells you how far we've come is to look at what's per capita availability of staple grains. And if you look at per capita availability of staple grains, even as populations have been rising, even as the overall growth rate in population continues to be high, we find that the rate of growth in food supplies has surpassed population growth and the increased demand through rising income. So on a per capita basis, we've seen that overall grain availability has continued to be and continued to rise. And that's especially true when you think about wheat and how wheat production has risen over the years and primarily through the Green Revolution. The other aspect of agriculture development that is not generally discussed is that agriculture has been an engine of growth. Economists will tell you. Economists will tell you that India started as a predominantly rural economy with the vast majority depending on agriculture, on small farm agriculture. And because of agriculture productivity growth, what we've seen is rise in small farm incomes, and with the rise in small farm incomes, small farmers starting to purchase goods and services outside agriculture, and that then kick-started the growth in the overall. And so today, as the overall GDP rises, the share of agriculture falls. And that doesn't mean agriculture is not important. Agriculture continues to be a very important part of the economy, but the overall size of the economy keeps rising because of the growth in the non-agricultural sectors. And that structural transformation happened because of the primary investments that were made in agriculture in the 60s and beyond that, and with the kickstarting of the Green Revolution. So let's ask ourselves, what has worked? What made the Green Revolution a success? So if you think about that, I think one of the big issues, criteria for the success has been long-term sustained investments in agriculture research and development. I think without that sustained investments in research and development in agriculture, we would not have seen the success that we have. I'm sitting here in ICAR and in the Indian Agriculture Research Institute. This is where it happened. These were the pioneers in investments in agriculture research. Professor Swaminathan, Dr. Paroda, etc., luminaries who made this happen right here on this campus. And I think that's something we have to be really proud of, the investments that took place. But what's important is that we see continued high levels of investments in agriculture research and development. Because the work is not done, there's still a long way to go, and I'll be talking about that. The second, the technology itself would not have worked if you did not have investments in irrigation infrastructure. And of course, roads, transport, and other infrastructure. So it's not accidental that the big changes in productivity that happened were in areas where early investments in irrigation infrastructure took place. Areas such as Punjab, Haryana, some of the delta regions in the southern states like Andhra, Tamil Nadu, etc. These were the areas where the investments, early gains in the Green Revolution happened. And then subsequently, groundwater irrigation using pumps, etc., created further opportunities for expanding in terms of areas adopted through the Green Revolution. But the third aspect of this is, as we think about the Green Revolution, we have to also recognize that the total area under cultivation, the net cultivated area, has remained relatively stable over the past 5 decades, even as overall productivity and crop outputs have increased. And that's been because of intensification of cropping. So you're going from single crop to double, sometimes triple crops. And that intensification of cropping has been one major gain that we've seen through the Green Revolution. And that allowed us to continue to be productive, continue to feed the growing population without expanding the land area. Imagine what it would have been like if we had low productive 1 ton, 1.5 ton food crop systems. Imagine how much land we would have needed if we had to feed our population with that low productive lands. But because of higher yields, because of higher intensification, we were able to expand output without increasing land area. And that allowed us to release some lands into forests, into wildlife preserves, etc., which would not have happened without the technology change. So when I think about the big lessons from the Green Revolution, the positive, I think about it in terms of the 4 I's. The 4 I's are innovations in agriculture technology, infrastructure investments, irrigation, power, roads, etc. Institutional reforms, especially in land rights, access to credit, access to services, etc. And finally, incentives for enhancing productivity. Price policy, price incentives, input subsidies, procurement policies for food grain procurement, for the food security stocks, the PDS, etc. So all of these come together. These 4 I's have come together to create the success that we've seen in the Green Revolution. But there have also been issues that haven't worked as well. The Green Revolution also had consequences that we could have been better at managing. I think one of the consequences is that we've seen regional differences in productivity gains. We all know the story. And that's primarily because of a lack of investments in irrigation and other infrastructure. You've seen eastern part of India, central parts of India that have lagged behind. But I also think it's because of this focus that we've had on just the top three staples, rice, wheat, and maize. So there are parts of India where it makes sense to increase productivity of rice and wheat. The agroecologies work. But there are other areas where the agroecologies are not so suitable for intensification of rice and wheat. But if you focus on only rice and wheat, then you create these regional differences. But today we know that certain parts of the country, millets or pulses or oil seeds are much more suited to that particular agroecologies. And so it's not surprising that the central part of India has now become the oil seed belt of India, growing soybeans, cotton, etc. And if we had initially thought through those, we may not have seen as much of interregional differences as we do today. And because of that focus that we've had on the primary staples, we've seen over time some of the crowding out that's taken place. Pulses, which were very predominant in the northern parts of India, in the Indo-Gangetic plain, actually disappeared entirely from that. Core cereals, millet, sorghum, etc., they completely disappeared from major parts of the crop producing areas within India as they were replaced by rice and wheat. And these are the crops that are important from a nutrition point of view. They have high micronutrient content, pulses have high protein content, etc. And so today we are talking about how do we rejuvenate these crops. But that change happened because of that initial focus that took place. So hunger continues to be a challenge, even as we've made enormous progress. Today we are looking at around 15% of population not having adequate amount of calories on a daily basis. And that's calculated through the FAO's undernourishment numbers. But imagine, it would have been closer to 45 to 50% in the 1960s. So we've made big progress. But we still have a long way to go. But the good news is that if you think in terms of the depth of hunger, the difference between the current, what calorie consumption is today relative to the minimum required for people who don't have the minimum, then that depth is actually coming down. So in the 1990s, that the difference was around 200 calories, and today it's coming closer to 100 calories. So we're making progress. We're making progress in reducing that gap between the calorie consumption of the undernourished populations and the minimum needed for survival. So that's good news in terms of progress. But even as we address the problem of hunger, calorie hunger, we are still facing the triple burden. So the hunger problem, the hidden hunger problem of deficiency of micronutrients, and then the emerging problems of obesity. And that's something we need to be concerned about. And we have to think about these problems affecting women and children at a much greater level than they affect men. And so the gender difference, the age difference in the risk of malnutrition is much higher. And that's an issue we have to address rather than think about everybody being equal. And as I said, even as we address the chronic problems of malnutrition, this rising incidence of obesity rates is something that we need to take very, very seriously as we look at